This is Burlington, and here we are in the Channel 17 newsroom, again with our ongoing series, Nuclear Free Future Conversation. And viewers, please welcome with me our returning guests, Maggie Gundersen, the founding president of Fairewinds Energy Education, and Arnie Gundersen, the chief engineer of Fairewinds Energy Education. And when you were here the last time, Maggie and Arnie, you were preparing to go, Arnie, to Japan for the trip to Japan. And let me say before we go into that it's a portentous month in March here, in March 2012, because it is almost 1 year since the triple meltdown of Fukushima Daiichi. And also on March 21st here in Vermont is the date of the scheduled closing of Entergy Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Plant according to the vote of the people of Vermont. So this is a very, very important time, and the viewers and I want to know, Arnie, why did you go to Japan? And what did you learn there? And what do they learn from you?
No, thank you for having us, by the way. I went to Japan for a week as a guest of a publishing company called Shueisha, and they published an interview with Maggie and I that they did several months ago. And so there's a book out in Japanese only with my smiling picture on the cover, and it's on the newsstands in Japanese only. And the reason for the timing of it was exactly like you said. It's that the accident occurred essentially a year ago, March 11th, and they wanted to inform the Japanese that what the accident really caused, and then also that there are alternatives. So what this says is Fukushima Daiichi, and it's the truth and the future. So it's a look ahead at alternatives to these huge nuclear generators, and that the Japanese do have alternatives that can be non-nuclear if they choose.
Okay, and we have titled this program, Fukushima Daiichi, An Accident Waiting to Happen. Now, you address that in the book, and you've addressed that issue in a lot of your writing and interviews. And can you tell me why did this happen? And Maggie, please help us on this.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it happened in part because of mechanical things and a tsunami, but really at the bottom of it was just a total breakdown in organization. That the Japanese knew this was happening, and because of something we call the echo effect, the industry and the regulators are sharing the same story, which is not necessarily accurate. What we were able to show in the book, and then separately in this the report that we put together after the book came out, is that the regulators really aren't regulating, not just in Japan, but worldwide. And they knew that a tsunami could occur, and yet they did nothing to prevent it. They knew that the Mark I containment was weak, and yet they continued not just to run it for 40 years, but then they gave it a license extension.
Some of this is in your Greenpeace report. You have a report that is part of a Greenpeace report for the Greenpeace International, and yours is entitled The Echo Chamber Effect, right?
Yes. And
in that, you report that only a month before they had gotten the watchdog agency equivalent to the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission here in the United States, had gotten a report that Fukushima Daiichi could not sustain an earthquake of that power.
It actually started 20 years before, and then 10 years before, and then 3 or 4 years before. And actually 8 days before the tsunami hit, the TEPCO, the owner of the power plant, convinced the Japanese regulators that there really wasn't enough data on this tsunami and they needed to study it further, and that until the studies were done, they didn't have to do anything to the power plant. So this is a 20-year history, at least, and maybe even beyond that, that the authorities have known, and Tokyo Electric has known, and still decided to do one more study and one more study to avoid spending the money to repair the plant.
So you're telling me that TEPCO made that decision themselves, that they decided, well, there's nothing to do. But who is the oversight agency? Don't they have anybody to answer to?
Well, there's two. There's NAIS, which is the National Atomic...
NISA.
NISA, I'm sorry, NISA. Sorry, flipping my acronyms. Which is their regulator, like the NRC in Japan. Mm-hmm. And then there's the International IAEA. But the International IAEA is not a regulator. It's chartered by Congress, by the UN, and its mission under that charter is to promote nuclear power worldwide. And everyone thinks the IAEA is regulating, and they are the ones who said repeatedly that the Japanese had the best tsunami protection and earthquake, seismic protection in the world. Yeah. And
there's nothing on the record within the United States or within the IAEA records that before the earthquake anybody expressed any reservations about these power plants. Of course, as soon as the earthquake occurred, now everybody says, well, it's a Japanese system, it can't happen here. But it was interesting, in the heat of the moment, the NRC released some emails just this week, and one of the NRC senior staffers blurted out that the Mark I containment is the worst containment design he's ever seen. Now, for 40 years, everybody's known that, but everybody's ignored it. And yet, literally on the 12th, one day after the accident, the NRC is saying in their own private emails that this is the worst containment that's ever been designed.
And isn't it correct that that's the same, that Fukushima Mark I design is the same as Vermont Yankee and the same as 23 other plants in this country?
That's right. Breathtaking, isn't it?
It is breathtaking, and it's so alarming because the IAEA also continued, when they went in to monitor the meltdown, they continued to issue statements saying that Japan TEPCO was handling the disaster in a very good way. And yet, according to the Greenpeace report, again, it's an example of their rubber stamping what the owner is doing and saying that it's okay. And yet, according to the Greenpeace report, there are so many horrible things that happened that we are not aware of. And for example, I read in the report that Greenpeace went in to measure the radiation even before the IAEA didn't even go in for several days. And the Greenpeace was already there measuring the radiation.
Right. And the industry, the Japanese industry, and the NRC and the IAEA were all condemning Greenpeace's readings as false, and they were quite accurate, quite accurate.
And as a matter of fact, the Japanese kept the Rainbow Warrior at least 20 miles away from the shore. That's their boat that they were trying to get in and find out the contamination that was in the Pacific Ocean. So Greenpeace had a boat, they wanted to bring it in and get good readings, and the Japanese exercised their sovereignty and kept Greenpeace from getting good data. Despite that, Greenpeace had the first volunteers on the ground and accurately was measuring stuff days and weeks before the IAEA. The report says the IAEA came in, agreed with Greenpeace, and then changed their mind 2 days later and said, oh no, it's really not a problem, under pressure from the Japanese.
From the Japanese government, not the people, but the government. One of the things that startled me is after, 10 months of showing real problems, in December, the IAEA substantiated TEPCO's false announcement of a cold shutdown. And Arnie can speak to the technical aspects of that, but it's impossible to have cold shutdown. This plant can't be totally turned off. All the mechanisms for doing that are broken.
Yeah, the nuclear core, when you have a cold shutdown, assumes that the nuclear core is in the nuclear reactor. And that, of course, doesn't happen if you have a meltdown. If the nuclear core is not in the reactor, it's impossible to have a cold shutdown. And yet, when Tokyo Electric announced it, the IAEA said, "Isn't this great?" The United States States Department said, "Isn't this great?" Everybody just kind of jumped on the bandwagon to make this problem go away.
And are they sticking to the story that they do have a cold shutdown at the moment?
There's been some near misses in the last couple months, and people are talking about, well, it's a cold shutdown, but it's very fragile. And that's, the Japanese have actually said, well, it's fragile, but it's cold shutdown. And those two words don't go together. Cold shutdown means stable, fragile means fragile. So basically it was designed to placate a bunch of people and make the Japanese think the issue's over, which is one of the reasons why I went over there, was to tell them the truth. What happened, that the regulator was cozy with Tokyo Electric, and that the plant design was inadequate from the start, and that everybody knew a tsunami was likely. And I think I was really well received at the Japanese Press Club, and I also met with the Japanese Bar Association, and about 10 other publications in hour-long interviews while I was over there. And it was a message they need to hear, and I was glad I could do it.
And the people are hungry for the truth. Isn't that so? I mean, they are so distrustful of what the authorities have been telling them since the meltdown, and that the emergency planning situation was dismal on March 11th. And in the days afterwards, one of the most distressing things I read in the Greenpeace report was that they didn't provide the potassium iodine to the people who were the most susceptible to the radiation. And then, tell us about the potassium iodine.
Well, the potassium iodide is a pill that can prevent iodine, the radioactive iodine, from being absorbed into your thyroid. Your thyroid will suck in the iodine that's released, and the potassium iodide will fill that in ahead of time so that children's thyroids especially cannot be compromised. They had 10 days where they debated whether they should even put this out there and let people have it, and then they decided they would, and then it was delivered to the prefecture and to the different towns, and then they said, oh no, don't give it out yet, we might upset the people and they'll get worried. Well, you need to have that in the first 24 to 48 hours to fill the thyroid with safe iodine, and that wasn't done. That wasn't done, and there's a similar issue here in the U.S. Under President Bush, he took steps in certain areas of the country, recalled their supplies of potassium iodide because he did not want the nuclear industry to be viewed as a threat to anyone's health.
I well remember that, and because I was in the New York City area, at Indian Point, about 30 miles, I believe Indian Point is from New York City, and everybody was clamoring for the potassium iodine because they were afraid. We were afraid of the terrorist threat of bombing the nuclear power plant. And that was the reason that President George W. Bush withdrew the potassium iodine, because he said he didn't want the people to be alarmed,
right?
Not to worry.
Not to worry.
Yeah.
And now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is saying, well, maybe we should make plans to get potassium iodide out beyond 10 miles after Fukushima. Taken a year after Fukushima and taken 40 years for those of us who thought the tablets should be readily available. But now finally the NRC is saying, my God, we might need them out beyond 10 miles. We better stock more.
I can't remember the NRC inspector's name. I don't know if you remember it, but there was a particular NRC inspector who went to the mat about the potassium iodide. He had done all this research, and he tried to get the NRC to recommend that this was out there and to put it out there and to get it in every town near a nuclear plant. And because they didn't want to alarm, and this is like 20 years ago.
Yeah.